Welcome to Teen Minds Redefined, where we strive to allow you to have a relationship with your kid. And I'm going to say for today's episode, the number 48% is the stat. That's the stat of divorce across North America, which means if it's not you, it's maybe the person next to you. And so we are just trying to really share some information, share a story, maybe shift your perspective on how we are raising our kids through our choices to divorce. And is it possible to navigate single parenthood without the chaos and the drama? And JP Marsh is here to say, yes, it absolutely is. JP, welcome to Teen Minds Redefined. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So, JP, let's start. Tell us your story and why are you on the podcast talking about it?
Well, so, my daughter is not quite a teenager yet. I have a 9-year-old. And her mother and I broke up. We were unmarried. And so we'd split up right after, just not long after she turned 2. So I've been doing the single father co-parenting situation for the last 7+ years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gone from your normal conflict scenarios to a lot of collaboration now, you know what I mean? And it's not a big deal. She had her dance recital the other day, and my daughter's in a blended family now, but we all do barbecues together and we all do holidays together and sit by each other at these school functions, sports functions, yada yada yada. Go to the lake, and stuff like that. And it's no big deal. And it's not weird because, obviously nobody makes it weird. But the more we were around people, especially once she got into school age, and, obviously half of the kids that are in her school are in the same situation that she's in, whether it be still high conflict parents, but you get to interact with all these other parents. And the thing that I'd hear the most would be, oh, I wish my situation was like that. It was like yours. I wish we could do stuff like that, and da 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 da. And in my mind, the normal should be like mine, and the outliers should be the ones that can't communicate at all and can't even be around each other in person. And then through different times in the last 10 years or so, when I've been doing a lot of this internal self-work, and especially after the collapse of the relationship, and right after we had split up, my dad died unexpectedly. So then I was dealing with much of that stuff. So I had a lot of these, I kind of went into a depression and fell into a funk and all these different things. And then as I started changing my outlook on life and the way that I perceived things going on around me and the way that I reacted to the things I perceived going on around me, everything in my life just little by little became, my co-parenting relationship was easier and started mellowing out. My work-life balance became a lot smoother and started working itself out. I was, I had to train myself to be an adult and deal with baggage from, my childhood that I don't want to pass on to my daughter, and deal with traumas and all these different things that had happened or in and around me my entire life, so that I could raise her to be, more confident, better person, more empathetic, more compassionate, and hopefully deal with less trauma and baggage from her childhood than I had to deal with from my childhood. And the coaching thing kind of was an easy, I still do my day job. I've been in construction carpentry for 20+ years, but when I was young, my dad quit drinking and had to go and needed AA, and so coaching and AA sponsorship, there's not a lot of difference. You're helping somebody 3 to 5 years behind you. And so growing up, when my dad stopped drinking, I think I was like 5 years old, and it was, for the first couple of years, he needed like an AA meeting or 2 a day. And so, but the sense of community and the helping the people that were on the same path that you're on, or, you know, helping people avoid pitfalls, changing their mindset, changing their triggers, identifying their triggers, and all of these things were all a part of AA, because you're essentially doing the same thing. And so it wasn't that huge of a leap, you know, growing up in that sort of a structure or system.
You know, it's funny when I hear, as soon as I hear you say inner work, I'm like, yes. And I think almost every episode I've done for parents of teens, moms of teens, doesn't matter, is if you're struggling over there, it's because you're struggling in here.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start working in here, you don't have to say anything. It just ripples out. It just ripples out. And
yeah.
And I, you know, I love that you're doing that, and your daughter's only 9, because she's seeing this, and you are going to collapse time for her. And when, you know, when I start doing this inner work and I'm doing like master classes and blah, blah, blah. And sorry to say, 99% is women. Sorry.
Right.
I hate that now, but it also tells me that they're my age.
Right.
And my strive here is to collapse time for our kids too, to see what's it like to fulfill our purpose, do our inner work, battle our demons now when we're 18, 10, 19, whatever, and start living a life of authenticity and purpose from the start, instead of having to switch gears when you're 55 and I had the trauma, and my dad left, and they divorced, and they fought, and I can't be in the same room, and oh my God. So, and I'm going to just briefly, so I'm also divorced. My kids were 14 and 12, and so impactful that I will tell you, I remember, this was in 2005. I still remember where I was, what I said, how I said it to the kids, what I was wearing, what their reaction was. It was so impactful. And in the first year, it was a battle.
Right.
It was a battle. But then, you know, we figured it out in the sense that it has nothing to do with them. They didn't pick this. They didn't pick this. So there's so many things that we've decided for them. And I think it's just so important to be able to say they didn't choose this. And now and we're the same. We attend all our, you know, events together. We celebrate together. Everybody sends Mother's Day, Father's Day messages. My daughter just got married, and I was able to stand up in my speech and say thank you to the best co-parent I could ever ask for. And it was, you know, it's so friggin' important that we can get past this. So, JP, let's start when you first lit up. Was it all peaches and cream? Were you sending flowers here?
No. There was a lot of fighting and bickering, and, you know, there was a lot of conflict in our interactions, not necessarily in front of my daughter or around my daughter, or even really having anything to do with my daughter. And, you know, probably the majority to like 90% of it, I had control over, or it was me, right? And so, like, what I tend to find working with people and being around a lot of these things in these sort of circles of, you know, whether they're newly divorced, been divorced for 10 years, you know, if they are in these high conflict kind of situations, is the first thing that you got to do is get out of your own way. You know, you got to leave your own pity party, because whether she was intentionally trying to trigger me, you know, because you were together. I mean, you know what everybody's triggers, you know what the other person's triggers are, you know what's going to get a rise out of them. And so even if it, you know, whether it was purposefully or not, I was getting, you know, no matter what was being said or what text was coming through, I would instantly get defensive. And then I would throw gas on the fire. And then she would throw gas on the fire. And then the fire's never going out because you got two people both throwing.
Yeah.
Whereas the less you know, the less that I let my unresolved baggage, emotions, and feelings cloud what was actually trying to be discussed or what the, you know, what was actually going on, everything just kept getting more civil and more civil and more civil, and then got to a point where it was just past that. But you know, part of getting out of your own way is, you know, it's weird little mindset shifts, but because I don't, you know, rarely do I ever call my daughter's mother my ex, because that's not who she is in this situation. You know what I mean? Like, and the sooner that you can stop looking at them as the person that hurt you, betrayed you, left you, you know, get rid of the animosity, the anger, the feelings, the hurt, and start looking at them as the other parent more than your ex or the person that betrayed you or left you or whatever, then you start moving forward and it becomes leaps and bounds rather than rooting in this, you know, just staying in this pig pen and rooting around in all of this BS that's all in the past and it doesn't matter. The relationship's gone. Grieve it, let it go.
Yeah.
But you are connected to that person for the rest of your life or the rest of their life. You know what I mean? And so, you know, sure, everybody likes to say, you know, well, I mean, like once kids are out of high school and adults and on their own and stuff, that, you know, well, they're still going to have kids. Your daughter just got married. I mean, if you can't be in the same place at the same time, then you're putting your kids in situations where on the happiest day of their life, they got to figure out which parent gets to come to the wedding. Bingo. What parent gets to go to the hospital when they have their first child? What parent gets to babysit when they go on vacation? Who gets to go on vacation with them if it's going to be a big family cruise when the kid's 10, 12 years old? What parent's going to be at the soccer games or grandparents going to be at the soccer games? What, you know what I mean? And so like you're there forever, you know, God willing that there's not a tragedy of some sort, you know what I mean? Like that's the only really way that you're getting out of that kind of situation. But once you can get out of your own way and stop seeing them as the person that did X to you or vice versa, and start treating them as the other parent, right? Everything just starts, you know, a lot of the once you can just deal with that baggage, everything just starts to kind of change.
Yeah. Can you think back to the time or what it was that made you go, oh, not my ex? Not my ex.
Well, there was, I mean, obviously, you know, the circumstances of the divorce or breakup and those things, some circumstances are going to make it a little bit harder to sort of get that shift because, you know, when, you know, from probably the time that, you know, when she was pregnant or a little after she was pregnant, the relationship was just a bunch of switches had shifted in my brain when my daughter was born, which, you know, inevitably changed my outlook, mindset, you know, determination, goals, all these things. Sent me into overdrive as a provider, wanting to be, you know, have a certain kind of life and a certain kind of household and raise my daughter a certain kind of way. You know, obviously it was somewhat wrapped around baggage from my childhood and those kinds of things, you know, the things you tell yourself your whole life. Well, when I'm a parent, this is why it's going to be different. And, and so little by little, the relationship just kept just deteriorated. And then when she was, around the time we were arguing a lot, it just wasn't a happy place. There wasn't a lot of collaboration, even knowing we were together and all that kind of stuff. And it was kind of a deal where I kind of had to make a choice and really look at the situation, because I knew that if my daughter got very much older than she was, then it was going to be a lot harder to try to separate.
Yeah.
So, in my mind, I've always looked at it, my parents were married my entire life, but it wasn't a very loving, supportive household. My parents were two roommates my entire life. And so one of the things that I had always told myself was, even if I have kids, two happy households are always going to be better than one miserable one.
Yeah.
Like I never believed that one miserable house was better off than two, thriving, happy individuals.
Yeah.
But I also knew that as they get older, are able to, my daughter's 2, so her memories of me and her mother together are very few, if any, left.
Yeah.
Whereas you get into 8, 10, 12 years old, then that's when you'll start to get it becomes a lot harder on the children, because then you start getting their emotions and feelings and guilt, or maybe they take responsibility for it, think it's their fault.
Yeah.
And there's and I knew that age was going to be coming up. So it was kind of a deal where either it's going to get better or now is the time. And so we just kind of, and then we broke up, but it wasn't a deal. It probably took about a year. And once everything started kind of getting easier and we weren't fighting all the time, because the fighting wasn't due to unresolved feelings or, lingering emotional attachment to each other. It was more of just trying to sort out, and me getting triggered and pushing her buttons and vice versa, and going back and forth.
For sure.
And so it wasn't hard for us to kind of get out of that, pining for the, when we were done, and nobody was really looking back to try to latch on or hold on to something that wasn't there.
Well, and I think too, it'd be completely unrealistic to say, yeah, okay, we're not together anymore and everything's peachy keen. Yes, we can co-parent, no problem. Completely unrealistic. And I think that's really unrealistic when it's one person has decided all of this long before it actually happens.
Yeah, usually one more than the other.
Yeah. Right. So one person has gone through the 6 stages of grief
and checked out before the other person even knew.
Yeah. So they're going to be angry. Yeah, you're going to be dealing with this shit because that's the position you put them in now. Not that it's something that's wrong, but it's you can't expect somebody over here to be where you're over here. Like, it's just so unfair. And then there's so many times I hear that. It's like, oh, he's so mad about this, or she's so mad about that. Yes, because you've had all this time in your brain where you haven't bothered to communicate that this is where you're headed.
And it's kind of funny to me too, because grief is grief, right? Nobody tells people that they need to follow this schedule if their sibling dies, parents die, grandparents die, or any coworker, best friend, childhood friend, doesn't matter. Nobody's telling them that they need to grieve on this schedule and get over it in a month's time. Whereas essentially for that person, for both people, one has already grieved and moved past, and that's usually whoever starts dating first is usually the one that checked out of the relationship months and months ago. But then to demand that the other person speed their grief process to fit into your schedule, because they're gonna have emotions come up, because they're more, odds are they may have gotten blindsided by the entire situation.
Yeah, I think that's such important information to have out there, because I think it's so unfair when the partner who's gone through everything is just like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Okay, can't you believe it? Anyway,
Right.
so let's talk about then, like, how do we go from this chaos? Like, what kind of conversations are you having? What kind of steps are you taking? Like, if we've got listeners who are like, I'm right at the beginning stages here,
Right.
And yet it's not going to be perfect, but can we help somebody avoid those landmines?
Stop engaging. Right. So, like, say you're doing drop off and pickups at, McDonald's parking lots or whatever, and you have a high conflict, and your ex is high conflict, right? And every time it's a meltdown in the parking lot. You are not legally bound by a wedding ring or a relationship title to sit there and listen to their BS. Put your kids in your car, say adults don't speak to each other like this, get in your car and leave. If they want to have meltdowns, they can have meltdowns. But the more times than not, whether it's find your triggers. So don't instantly become defensive like I used to, and then send a snooty message back when really the message that came in was about nothing, right? Or if they want to poke, don't engage. Because if they're looking for a certain reaction, so that, whether it be they want to be the victim or be able to go run to their family and friends and make you out to be this monster that, oh my God, you'll never believe what he's saying about me now, or saying to me now, or doing to me now. The less you give them the reaction that they're looking for, the less they're going to come looking for it. Because if you're not giving it to them, they're going to stop trying to get it. And so if they're throwing gas on the fire, and every time they throw gas, you throw water, they're going to quit throwing gas on it because it's not doing anything. They're not getting the reaction that they want.
Yeah.
And also set, express, explain, communicate, and hold clear and hard boundaries, right? So, like, set boundaries, but just as important as setting boundaries, you have to communicate those boundaries to somebody else, because nobody's a mind reader. Just because you set the boundary doesn't mean that they understand that is a boundary anymore.
Yeah.
Because if you don't communicate that these are my boundaries, I'm not going to be talked to this way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But also, if you're in a conflict place, you're going to get a lot farther with positive reinforcement than you are with negative reinforcement. Yeah. So instead of, I use the drop off pickup thing a lot, because usually that's a pretty common place, and in a situation where a lot of these things either go really smooth or really, really explosive. But if one parent, say the dad's always late picking them up, or, meeting you to drop them off, or, vice versa, whichever one. Instead of having a snooty remark because they're late, and having a big blow up about it because, oh my God, well, I had to stop and get gas, whatever, the excuses, and then you go back and forth. Instead of falling into a place where they're going to be defensive and just shut down because maybe you've nagged them for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
The time that they show up on time, I really appreciate it when you show up, when you're on time, and we can do this really smoothly, and you respect my time, and I'm not sitting here waiting for you, or you're waiting for me, and it, I really, thank you for being on time. And they're going to, what I mean? And it's just easier. I mean, because obviously if you're in a high conflict place and you've been doing it for years, the nagging, picking, poking, prodding, belittling is not getting you anywhere. It's not moving you forward. It's not making things more civil or collaborative. So sometimes to get a better outcome on the same negotiation, you just change your tactic and go from a different angle. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, but it's not going to hurt. It's not going to make it any worse if you're in a high conflict place.
And you have an audience in the back seat.
Mm-hmm.
You have an audience watching this all play out.
Right. You're
And
teaching your kids how to interact with other adults.
yeah. And I also think that you are making them feel a certain loyalty to the other parent. You know, like if mom's hammering on dad, then I think the kids are like, but that's my dad. That's my dad.
Right.
And vice versa. So you know, I think if you always remember that you have an audience, and if you think that you're battling in front of your kids is going to make your kids side with you or agree with the divorce, it's not happening. Don't even think about it.
Well, then also, if you go one step further, and this is something I bring up a lot, and it catches a lot of people off guard because they don't even it's not something that you would comprehend. But you go one step farther, and you get done with the big blow up like that in a big argument, and you get in the car, and you're bad mouthing, say, the dad. You know, that piece of POS.
Yeah.
He's always late. He's never on time. God, he's a dirtbag. Da, 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 da. Kids in the back seat mentally feel like they're 50% mom, 50% dad. And so you were sitting there just.
I say that verbatim.
Mentally and emotionally. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I have said literally that verbatim since we separated. They're 50% dad, which means they're 50% asshole. If I say that, not happening. And I'm so agree. I can't agree more about that. It makes me crazy when I hear that going on. And yeah, it's so funny. That's exactly what I say. 50%. It threw me off, but it's true. It's true. And
kids think that way. I mean, they, you know, but, you know, even my daughter being 9 years old, she probably, you know, DNA, genes, and all that stuff. Yeah, she's 50%, you know, half and half. She's half my DNA, half her mom's DNA, but she's 100% her own person, right? But they're not going to be, you know, I probably couldn't comprehend that I was my own person until I was close to 20 years old. You know what I mean? And so the identity, you know, you start running into these weird, you know, and it's going to get worse because the divorce rates and single parenthood and all of these things are just keep going, you know, climbing. But you run into these situations where when the kids are really little, you don't think that they understand, and they're a lot more perceptive than a lot of people want to give them credit for. And they don't, or you don't think they're paying attention, even knowing you're bad mouthing dad to your mom and at the table, and they're sitting there watching SpongeBob or Bluey 10 feet away.
Yeah.
Sure, they're not looking at you or part of the conversation, but they're still hearing and interpreting everything that you're saying. But also, your kids, you know, your kids didn't choose to be born. You chose to have the kids.
Yes.
And you didn't have kids, and they didn't sign up to be weapons or spies. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So,
oh my God, yes.
But also the identity crisis that's going to form out of this, of these scenarios, because they got to be this person at mom's house.
Yeah.
They can't love dad. They can't act like they like dad. They got to be this completely false person that's not even them to appease mom and play this role so that mom loves me and doesn't get mad that I love my dad and da 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 da. Yeah. Possibly same thing at dad's house. You know, I can't express my love for mom. You know, I act like I don't want to talk to her, even though she has court-ordered phone calls or whatever. You know, because it's an inconvenience for dad, or dad's got some hang up because she's able to call or ask him, you know, whatever, and you know, whatever the case may be. So then they're split between these two identities that aren't even theirs, but they don't even have an identity because they've never been allowed to be who they are. You know, but it's the same as I have a weird hang up too with anybody that says mini me about their kids, like women. You know what I mean? Like, have you seen that around a lot? Like, and it's like, you're basically telling your kid that they're not allowed to be anything other than a small version of you. And so they can't be themselves. So if you're super girly as a mom and your mini me is naturally going to be more of a tomboy, but you dress her like a mini version of you, instead of letting them develop and become who they are and want to be,
Yeah.
then when they're out of your control, 18, 19, 20 years old, that's when you see these kids like freak out and go way overboard because they don't know who they are.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Whole point of us being authentic so they can be authentic is 100%. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, any of these, like you said, we chose to have children.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we chose to divorce.
Right.
So, I have a big thing, even when we're having, family, Thanksgiving, Christmas, blah, blah, blah. And, they can go there, they can go there, they can go here. And I always say, I don't care if it's February that we're celebrating Christmas. You have your own lives, you do your own thing, and we just get together. And I think it's so, it's so detrimental when the kids, most kids are now excited Christmas is coming, and they're excited their birthday's coming. But if you're in this kind of conflict, you don't kind of stress you're causing your kid because, oh my God, what are they going to say? Who's going to get me here? And who's going to do this? And who's going to buy the best birthday present? Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And they had no option in this. And I think keeping that forefront, like any of your decisions, any of your, and I find too that some parents are using their kids as their confidant.
Right. Your kid's not your therapist or friend.
Yeah. And how much should they know about the details of this?
Age appropriate, but really not. It's not. Yeah, your kids aren't your. And then, and you start, there's starting to be these newer, some defects of, outside of the statistical data of being raised by, only one parent or the other, especially, there's more data obviously with just single moms, as far as suicide rates, dropout rates, teen pregnancy. 85% of the prisoners in the United States prison systems were raised by fatherless homes, and all of these. I mean, there's all these statistics, but you have these newer, maybe the last 5-10 years of son husbands and daughters, like sort of like daughter sisters with some of these, and because the custody and all these things, obviously more women have the custody than the men. So some of the data or some of these things, but like you got these younger guys that live with that basically become their mother's support systems and never leave home, but also are sort of, lesser masculine stereotypical men because they've sort of had to be their mom's emotional support boyfriend since they were 12 years old. And then when they get to adult age, they don't leave because they can't leave mom home alone, out of guilt or whatever. And so they end up sort of trapped. But then also, if they do find a mate or girlfriends, nobody's good enough for my son. And the mothers are super involved because they don't have their own life, right? Because they've crutched their sons to be their, quote unquote, boyfriend, more or less, or husband, son husbands. And then the daughters get kind of in the same situation, but they get turned into mom's BFF at 13, 14 years old and confidant. And you got them sort of being a 25-year-old, 12-year-old, because mom has no filter and dumps all of her emotional baggage and all of her venting and all of these things.
Yeah.
And so you're running into these sort of weird, I don't know, personalities or social constructs that are kind of starting to form out of some of these things. And it's kind of scary because, you know, outside of certain scenarios and certain types of things, kids need both parents, you know.
Yep.
And then you get a lot of these, well, what about a step parent? Well, step parent is a person, but they, you know, if a woman gets remarried and that's the father figure, more times than not, he's got all the responsibility with none of the authority. And so that it's not their dad, you know what I mean? Like, he doesn't have the same, you know, influence to teach his daughters how to be ladies or teach the sons how to be men, because anytime that he would try to be an authoritative figure, you get that, well, you're not going to talk to my son that way. You're not going to talk to my daughter that way. I don't have to listen to you. You're not my dad. And then mom backs up the kid. You're not talking to my kids that way. You're not their father, you know, And so you're not getting the same influence that you do from having both of your parents involved. And it's sad that even with a lot of this data and a lot of these statistics, you know, here in the US, and probably not that much different in Canada, you know, for the most part. That, you know, in some of these you know, in some of those situations with, you know, I don't want to say super toxic, but, or not, maybe not consciously toxic mothers, but like the ones that are sort of in these situations, you don't have dad there to keep mom in check and say, this is inappropriate. You know what I mean? Your daughter's 16. She doesn't need her boyfriend is not staying over. You know what I mean? Like, and it's wild how like socially acceptable this seems to be, the direction it's going. Like a 14-year-old needs to be dressing and acting like she's 25 because mom allows her, and then doesn't want to go to dad's house because there's structure there, or vice versa. You know what I mean? I don't mean I don't want to make it seem one-sided, because there's a lot of dads that don't give a shit either. And so the kids want to go to dad's house because dad lets me do whatever I want, because he leaves all weekend and goes to his girlfriend's, and there's a lot of those situations as well. But you know, if you don't have both parents on the same page, constant chaos. And chaos, just like drugs or alcohol, you can be addicted to chaos or anxiety or stress. And so even knowing the kids get out of those homes, go to college, you know, I'm not a big proponent of college, but move out and start being an adult and having life. If they're addicted to chaos and conflict, then those are the relationships they're going to seek out. If they don't have their dad around, they're going to seek out distant men as relationship partners, because that's what they know. That's what they've learned. And so you get a lot of these personality traits and tendencies and habits that are being formed when they're 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, that are going to track them until they're 50 and go to therapy when they get tired of, you know, they're on their fourth marriage and 5 kids with 4 guys, or 4 baby mamas, because they, you know, as soon as it gets real and they leave, you know what I mean? I mean, there's 2 sides that, you know, on both ways, but it's getting really kind of scary.
I couldn't agree more. I guess we need to wrap up soon. So what I want to say is, from what I'm understanding, even from our conversation, first of all, the mic drop for me was, they're not your ex, they're your kid's parent, which I think is a great mind shift set. Like, honestly, I think if you can really buy into that, because that's accurate, I think that's a great mind shift. And so as a single parent, what inner work are you doing? What are you doing to stay balanced, stability, keeping your own, like, what are you doing for yourself that we can offer other single dads who are out there going, I'm just trying to do this and I'm just trying to do that, or single moms, doesn't matter.
I do, you know, I live a simple life in a rural area without a lot of, you know, and it's a life I choose and life I enjoy. But mindfulness training is a big part of my life, which is the meditating, awareness, being present all the time, which is, leads into, I live my life by what I call, I live my life by the rule of 5. So if I won't remember it in 5 years, I won't spend more than 5 seconds thinking about it right now.
Yeah.
Which alleviates a lot of anxiety and really gets rid of dwelling on the past, because instantly if it's going to be something that's important. And if it's not going to be on my radar in a couple of years, I'm not going to spend more than just a few minutes thinking about it or worrying about it or dwelling on it, because the past is the past. But also, and then the awareness, becoming aware of what you're allowing to brainwash you on a daily basis, because how you do one thing is how you do everything. And you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around, whether it be watching, major news media 24 hours a day, the podcast you listen to, the music you listen to, the people you talk to at work, the people you follow on social media, plus family, friends, kids, And so you're basically being brainwashed all the time. So I don't watch TV. Hardly at all. Like if I know that I'll like a show or something, like I'll watch a little bit of TV, mostly kids shows, movies, but I would rather grow and learn. And, I truly believe that everybody's doing the best they can with the tools that they have. And so the more tools I can add, then even better I can be. And so I listen to about 60, 65 audiobooks a year. Because I don't watch TV, and I don't numb myself with either exaggerated perceptions of reality, whether it be sitcom shows or news, you know what I mean? It's all, I mean, if you really want to be bummed and sort of depressed, then watch the news and watch TV. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and then I'm just aware of the things that I absorb day in and day out, what I interpret, because it changes your mood. So if you wake up in gratitude's a big deal. If I wake up in a funk, I got a playlist that on Spotify with a bunch of songs that I know put me in a good mood. So then that goes on. If I want to do some deep thinking, stuff like that, I drive a lot for work, so I have the opportunity to listen to audiobooks pretty much all day at work and all afternoon. So it's easy for me to consume a lot of audiobooks, but trying to grow, trying to expand, and just being aware of the more that you're aware, the more you're aware of what you're saying, your facial expressions, the way you treat other people, the way that you react to your ex, or the way that you react to your kids, because that's the only thing that you can really control. The kid says that mom was talking about you and saying all these things, and it's like, you can be aware of your hurt feelings and wanting to react, but if you stay who you are, it all comes out in the wash. If you never throw a fit for 10 years, and the other parents always high conflict with everybody that they deal with at the soccer games and the school, and yelling at principals and conflict with teachers, it doesn't matter what the other parent says about you, because everybody knows the truth. Your actions are always louder than any words. But if you start reacting and exploding and acting out of character, or not aware that you don't need to have a reaction to these things, then you are being the person that they're saying you are, whether that's really you or not. So
it's funny. I have a playlist on Spotify. It's actually called Raise My Frequency. And it's my dance party every morning.
Right. Well, it's just little things. I mean, it's just little things that
it is. And it's not overnight. I think what I've noticed with this kind of work is like, it's almost an afterthought, where I would say, hey, that didn't bother me at all. Or I was able to just go, that's okay. Like it's these little tiny things. And we have all of these tools within us. We have them all.
Right.
They're all free. They're
Right.
all free. We don't have to go to, I mean, there's nothing wrong with therapy, but you know, there's coaches like you, and then there's, you know, tools that we can put into place that I think are so important. And what an example you set for your little girl. That's awesome.
And
I love it.
It's like, you know, working on yourself, mental health, getting through depression, getting through tough situations, or any of these things. I mean, you're doing it consistently for the rest of your life. And the more that you can just register that there's no fixed, you know what I mean? There's no end. You're not hiking for the day to the Grand Canyon and back. You know what I mean? No, nobody who is working out to be healthier gets to a point of healthiness where they're just like, I don't have to anymore. I'm going to be like this forever. Or, you know,
because you get addicted to how it feels.
Right.
Right.
But I mean, there's no end to it. I mean, if you want to be healthy, you're working out till you don't want to be healthy anymore. And it's, you know, it's not a constant upward climb, because there are days where you just are a terror and you can't get out of your own head. And you know, it's not really any different than anything else. There's days where, you know, people diet and lose a bunch of weight, and then they go to an all-you-can-eat buffet and gorge themselves for 2 days straight, and then all of a sudden they got, you know, 10 more pounds that they just added back on, and it's just that's how it is sometimes. But not getting frustrated and giving up is probably the most important part, because it's, you know, the better you can be, the better everybody is around you. And if you want things to change, you have to be the change, because everybody's going to match you more so than you wanting everybody to change, so that it propels you to change.
Yeah, bingo. You know what? I appreciate your vulnerability, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. And someone is going to hear this podcast, and they're going to be at the very start of this journey. And you are going to change that trajectory for them and their kids. And I think that's so impactful, even if it's just one person. So tell us how to find you, how to work with you. What are all the things, JP Marsh?
Pretty much just on, I mean, Instagram. Social media is mentally and emotionally draining for me. I just don't do a lot of it. I mean, if it's not something that's authentically me, posting, making posts, doing all these things. But Instagram is usually the place where I direct everybody. And then if somebody has questions, or, you know, needs a little advice on certain scenarios, or wants to get in touch with me, then just Messenger on Instagram is usually the best place to do that.
Awesome. Well, I'll put all that in the show notes. JP Marsh, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate the work you're doing. It's great. It was great. Thank you for listening to Teen Minds Redefined, and we will see you next time.